Hey everybody, Katie here. Just one quick announcement this week before the show starts. Wanted to let you know that we are now official and legit because we have been accepted into iTunes. So you can search for us with your podcast app or in the iTunes store and find Two Artsy Gals there, and you can subscribe to us through that. I hope you do. And again, if you don't use iTunes or an Apple device, you can still subscribe to us through our blog and follow us there. So enjoy the show.
Unicorns and glitter and taxidermy critters are just some of the things they like. They also enjoy 80s hair bands, Grizzly Adams and John Goodman. So if you think that's weird, then you can take a hike. But the things they enjoy the most are making art and cracking jokes. So without further ado, here are your hosts. You've got your two artsy gals, your two artsy gals. Here are your two artsy gals.
Hey, welcome to Two Artsy Gals. I am Katie, and this is my buddy and co-host Sharon.
Hi, how's it going?
So today we're going to talk a little bit about, oh my gosh, I read the wrong notes. We're going to talk about some textures to live by. So I think one of the coolest things about mixed media artwork is how much texture you can achieve by just using different media and techniques in the piece that you're working on. I'm trying really quietly to move my microphone here. Sorry about the bumping. I think that's a really unique and cool thing about mixed media work because it's so easy to create texture, and there are so many ways that you can do it. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about why texture is important, different ways you can use texture. Sharon, why do you think that texture is important to mixed media artwork?
Well, because you can do so many things with texture. You can drop color back. You can bring color forward. You can make highlights. You can make things darker or lighter with them by dropping things forward and back. It adds depth. I think that's the biggest thing for me. It adds a lot of depth to a piece. And I just love texture because I'm a very tactile person, so I want to touch things. So I want to add texture to my paintings and my piece so that I can feel them.
I totally agree with that because I'm a toucher and I like to feel and touch things too. And that's a big thing for me. Like, I find myself really drawn to artwork of anybody's that I cannot control the urge to touch.
Yes.
Like, I want to go, oh, I bet you that feels really cool, you know?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I find myself sometimes I'll go up to paintings or places and touch the piece of artwork and then realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been touching it.
I know. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who got to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
Oh, wow.
And she said there's just some amazing artwork in there. And she said I had to stick my hands in my pockets because I just wanted to touch everything. I wanted to feel it and feel what it felt like on the canvas. And she's like, but there are signs all over that say, don't touch this. You know, like, some of those are priceless pieces of artwork. They don't want your greasy ass fingerprints all over them.
No kidding. But I hope they didn't have any velvet paintings there. That's one that I have to touch them.
I know. Oh my God. You kill me. Yeah, I'm going to find you someday rubbing a velvet Elvis on the wall.
I did one time own my own velvet Elvis.
Shut up.
It's true story.
I'm super jealous. I'm kind of sad that you don't have it anymore too. But
I know. I hope the person that the person that had it still has it.
That's pretty awesome. God, now I have those creepy girls with the big eyes, the velvet paintings. Do you know what I'm talking about? I have them stuck in my head. There's a name for them and I can't think of it, but because I always call them creepy girls.
Oh.
My cousin had one on her bedroom wall when we were little kids, and it hung at the foot of her bed.
Oh, Precious Moments?
Well, no, but they are kind of big foreheady, like the Precious Moments dolls. But they're like a 70s thing. They're always sad. Most of them have like a teardrop in their eye. Shit, now I'm going to have to look it up, the name of them. But if anyone knows the name of those paintings or what they're called, please email us and let us know, because it's going to drive me batty. But it used to scare me, though, because she had her big, weird-ass, scary, sad eyes. You'd wake up and there'd be this, like, looking down at you, and you're like, what the hell? So, but...
Oh, that's so funny.
But Elvis's aside and creepy little girls, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about texture can really be used a lot to help set a mood in a painting or a piece of mixed media artwork in ways that I think I think it makes it easier, I guess, is what I'm getting at, to express a mood, because that's what I use texture a lot to kind of make my pieces darker and more mysterious feeling. Like, you can get more shadow with texture, and it does create depth. It does make things seem like farther away or pulled back in the painting or brought forward. And I like the contrast of dark and light in my work. So I think when you're able to make a really deep, dark contrast with this texture, physical and visual texture, it brings what you're trying to highlight in the work. It makes it pop out and brings it forward better. But
I think it's interesting that we're both sort of, well, I've always known this, but you know, you're doing it to make something darker, and I'm sort of making it to be lighter and cheerier, and so you can use the texture for so many different things. So your pieces, you know, you're trying to get them to look darker, more mysterious, and mine, I'm kind of trying to lighten up, or, you know, I just think that's interesting.
I think it's funny because we've been friends for so long and we have so much in common. But in the last couple episodes that we've recorded, I've never really focused on how we're different. And I guess because you totally get my weird, dark sense of humor and laugh at it, I always assume, oh my gosh, Sharon's dark too, but you're really not. We're really like kind of day and night like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we get along so well, though. We kind of balance each other out a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think our art is really different, but I think we both appreciate one another's art.
Oh, yeah.
It is so different. So.
No, that's true. That's so funny, though.
Yeah.
That's odd. But yeah, so, you know, there are a lot of different ways you can get texture in a piece of artwork. And before we get too into like physical, tactile textures, I wanted to point out that texture doesn't have to be something that you can touch and feel. When you're doing any kind of drawing or, you know, like shading, and even the way that like when you make shades and highlights on a face, when you're drawing a woman or like a still life, that creates texture, a visual texture. Like, you're creating contours that you couldn't feel or touch. It's just a visual texture. And I think it's really important to add depth to any of your work. Like, you know, to keep it from looking like just like a flat cartoony drawing, or again, to create a mood. So, you know, a lot of the comic books even that I read use texture. There are a lot of, you know, dark, broody superheroes. There's always a lot of dark shading, or you get into some, like, you know, I read this one where there's a lot of fairy tale characters, and, you know, they use a lot of highlighting to make things seem bright in different places. So it really is a means to convey a lot of emotion in your piece of work. And I think that sometimes people don't realize they're using texture in that way, because it's not something I wouldn't say that I consciously say, I'm going to use texture to create this mood. Like, I don't think that many people really realize that's what they're doing when they're doing it. I do that a lot with my artwork, though. I don't realize exactly what it is that I'm doing until it's done.
Right.
And then I go, oh, hey, that's what I did. So.
Right.
So,
yeah, I have to agree. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
It's funny when when I was in design school and you're kind of forced, like when you're going to art school, they force you to, like, you have to justify your work and talk about it, and you have to learn how to talk about it. So you learn to spot that kind of like I would never in a million years talk about my artwork like that to like a normal person that isn't a art professor and grading me, you know, but
right.
But you learn to see things like, you know, your visual texture and your physical texture and what it does for the piece. And so I'm not going to get too far into that, but I just wanted to make sure that people understood that you don't always have to feel it. It doesn't always have to be a tactile thing, because we talked so much about, just because you and I are very tactile people and we like that, it doesn't have to be physical. So
yeah, that's a really good point.
we were going to talk a little bit about different texture methods that we like to use before we get into the little mini tutorials that we're going to do for you today. Sharon, do you have, other than the technique that you're going to talk about with us, do you have any methods that you find yourself going back to a lot when you're doing your artwork to create texture?
Well, one that's not the one that I'm going to talk about today is definitely using the paint on bubble wrap to create texture. So I'll paint a piece of bubble wrap and put it onto the canvas. And I just absolutely love that look of that texture and that patterning.
I like that too. I think it's really cute, and you can do so much with it. So
oh, absolutely. I love it. It can create a lot of depth depending on the colors that you choose, and it's just so simple. Yeah, you can cover a lot of ground. That's what I love.
That is true. You can cover a lot of ground. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I don't know. I think I find myself, depending on what I'm doing, I scratch a lot on the canvas. So even scratching, when I do my sculpting stuff, especially, I actually do to create texture in, like, if I want to create feathers or anything, the feeling of ruffled feathers in like the Raven journal covers that I do sometimes, I scratch a lot in the clay to make a lot of texture. And so then when I've painted over it, it gives that, you know, you paint over it and you shade over it, and then it gives that physical appearance of roughage or whatever, like ruffled feathers. So
absolutely. Yeah, I love to scratch. Like, I'll pull a lot of paint off of canvases or scratch it away with like a credit card. Pull that away. Or I make a lot of really textured jewelry with metal, so flat pieces of metal, then I'll texture them. I'll put patina paints on them, and then I'll sandpaper away the paint. So it'll reveal the bare metal, and then the patina's down in the sunken parts of the metal where I've hammered or embossed. And I really love to do that.
You know, that's another thing that I never even thought of, sandpapering. I've done that a few times in the little, like, the mixed media assemblages that I do. Sometimes I did one called Forgotten Henry quite a while back. And it was, I set it up like a Victorian sitting room in a shadow box. And I
love that piece.
I used sandpaper on origami paper to age the wallpaper and make it look really old. I like roughed it up, and it took some of the color off, and it gave it this like scuffed up texture. And I've also done that on paper to kind of give it a suede feel.
Oh yeah.
Like when you scruff it up with that. So there are a lot of ways you can get cool texture with paper. I love doing that. I crumple up, like crumpling up paper bags and stuff and using them, or any, like, sandpapering them, scraping it, cutting it up. So
oh yeah, absolutely. I love doing that. You can get a lot of great texture that way.
Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to do some little tutorials. And again, we're going to do like a verbal tutorial. We'll just kind of tell you guys how to go about doing what we're talking about. But again, we will on our blog have pictures and step-by-steps. So if you don't feel like you get enough from what we're saying or what our instructions here, you can always go to the blog and check it out, and I will give you that address at the end of the show. I am super excited about your example because I have never heard of the stuff that you are going to talk about, and I cannot wait to go to Blick and buy some. So I'm really excited about it. So tell us about this magical stuff that you use.
Okay, well, The paste that I love is by Golden, and they have a ton of different gel mediums. And the one that I love to use is fiber paste, and I use it with a stencil. You can get a lot of different stencils. The particular one that I've used in the example is by Christy Tomlinson, She Art, and she does a lot of different stencils. I'm sure you can get them online. I get them from a little shop up in the Olympic Peninsula, but you could probably get them anywhere online or any craft store. So basically what I do is I take, I might have a painted canvas or a piece of cardstock or whatever my piece is that I'm going to use. I'll lay that down, and then I will put the template down or the
stencil.
The stencil or the mask. They call them masks sometimes. And then I'll just take a popsicle stick and scoop out a whole bunch of the fiber paste, and I'll scrape, or you can use a credit card too. That works really well. Scrape it across the mask, and then the paste sort of just goes down into the holes of the mask, and I'll just keep scraping that across it, and then I'll lift it, and whatever is left from the mask will be there on your canvas. And sometimes I'll take a hairdryer or one of those heat guns that you use in stamping to heat that paste, and it will dry pretty quickly that way.
It does dry pretty fast.
Yeah, it dries really fast. I mean, probably like a minute or 2 minutes. So then you can go ahead and continue painting, because you don't want to sit and wait around. I'm not very patient.
I know, I'm not good at that at all. That's why I have a blow dryer in my studio. So.
Exactly, which is really great for that kind of stuff. And then you can just go ahead and paint on the top of it, and it creates a great texture. And you can put those masks. You don't have to put the mask right in the middle of the canvas. Use it on the corner. Use just a little bit of it, just to create. It's not like you have to get that mask and the paste on there perfectly. It's just to create some texture, because you're going to go over it with other paints and, rubs or what have you. And sometimes I'll even take a little paint on my finger and just rub it over that raised part.
Well, yeah, you can also, I would imagine, you can cut your own stencils, or, probably even use it without a stencil or a mask too.
Oh, absolutely. I've used that stuff. You can use it with your finger. Golden has a lot of different gel mediums that are, they have molding paste, they have crackle paste, they have beautiful beaded ones.
That you actually you sent me some pictures of those for this example too, I think, or for this episode that we just didn't end up talking about. Can you tell me a little bit about those too? Because I've actually seen them, but when I go into the craft store, when we go into Blick, I have to be really careful, because I will spend money I do not have. I go crazy sometimes. So I've never actually allowed myself to buy any of those, but I'm always buying just regular gel medium. So it's right in the same section with all of those. And I'm like, oh, what is this? Oh my gosh. So.
Yeah. They have a great one that's a beaded one, and you can add color to it because it'll turn out clear.
So do you just put paint in it, or? You
can put paint, you can put micas in it, you can put any way you can get color into it. You can basically add it to it, and it has these little glass beads in it, and it's awesome. It's so fun. And they also have a crackle one you can add color to. You can add, and then they have the fiber paste one, which is great for painting over, or you can add color to it. You can draw on top of it. Oh, they just have so many different textured ones. Coarse molding paste.
Oh man, I foresee a trip to Blick in my very near future. So. Oh
yeah, it can be dangerous. But I've had both of I've had the molding or the let's see, I guess it's the molding or the fiber paste and the beaded one. I've only used those two for the last couple of years, just trying to stick with those until I run out of them. Because you could get a lot, but you can go a really long way with just the fiber paste and the little beaded, the glass bead ones.
You mentioned crackle, and I didn't even think of that as when we were talking about examples that we were going to use for this episode. But I use, let's see, Ranger makes a one-step crackle And then there's another brand, I can't think of it, and I don't want to clamor and clatter around in my little tin containers here in my art supply shelf, but there's another 2-step crackle. But I do use crackle a lot to create texture, especially in a piece that I want to put, age on. Like you want something to look old. So I've used that a lot in the Forgotten Henry piece that I mentioned. I used that on everything in there, like the old floorboards and everything. But I also use it on my skulls a lot when I want the skull to be really old and craggly looking. I do that, and then you rub like dark paint into the cracks once the crackle dries and wipe it away.
Oh, I think I'm going to have to get some of that.
Oh, the Ranger is my favorite 1-step crackle, and the thicker you apply it, the deeper the crackles are. So the bigger and deeper the crackles get, it's really, really neat. So
I'm going to have to definitely get some of that, because I know Golden makes some too, but I love the Ranger products as well.
Yeah, I like this one a little bit better than I've tried the Golden Crackle, and I could be like a salesperson for Golden because I love everything, but I do prefer the Ranger when I'm painting over epoxy resin clays and stuff. I think it sticks a little bit better.
Cool.
So
I'll have to try that.
I like that a lot. But my example, I totally forgot. So I am actually teaching you guys a technique that I have guarded, which is kind of stupid because I'm sure I'm not the only person in the world that has used this technique, but I use this on a lot of my artwork, and it almost creates like a faux, well, it depends. You can create a lot of different looks with it. Sometimes I use it to kind of create a faux leather finish. But what I do is I use Mod Podge for this, and some people don't use Mod Podge because on paper or canvas, because it kind of gets a little bit sticky when it dries, and the stickiness eventually goes away. But because I paint over it when I use this method, I use Mod Podge over like more expensive the liquid gel mediums and stuff, mostly because Mod Podge is it's super cheap and it dries really super fast. So what I would do is, and in my example, I use just a piece of poster board, but you can do this on anything, a canvas, wood, it doesn't matter. You lay down a layer of Mod Podge with just a brush, and then you take tissue paper and you crinkle up the tissue paper however many times. If you want it to be really super wrinkly, or if you just want a few deep wrinkles, but I crumple it and straighten it and crumple it and straighten it. And then I lay it down over the wet surface onto the Mod Podge. And what I tried to do in my example was I made one end a bit more wrinkly than the other. I kind of tried to graduate from less wrinkly to more wrinkly. But I've used this method to make waves and ocean movements in a couple of pieces. So
neat. Would you just push around the tissue paper?
Yeah, you just push it around, and you can kind of I use a lot of the times I use bamboo skewers to kind of move it around a little bit. And if the beauty of it is, if it rips while you're doing it, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Because you're creating texture. And sometimes I use more than one layer. In my example for this little tutorial, I only used one layer, but sometimes I do a second layer over the top of it in the same method. I'll paint it all down with Mod Podge and then put more tissue paper on. And you can experiment with it, but it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So you lay this crumpled up tissue paper down over your surface that has been covered in Mod Podge, and again, make wrinkles, make texture, and you lay it down flat, and then you paint over the top of it with more Mod Podge, a nice thin layer of Mod Podge. And try not to get it. The key to this is first you want to make sure that you get it in all the wrinkles and grooves so they lay down nice and flat. But when you go over it, try to make sure that you don't have puddles of Mod Podge.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's kind of easy to get little puddles in the cracks and crevices that this texture makes. So you may want to scrape some Mod Podge off your brush and just go back over areas that look really super white. Because first of all, that's going to take longer to dry than all the other parts, but also you can get bubbles in it, and it will fill in the texture that you're making when you paint over
I
it.
see.
So then once you're going to want to, and Mod Podge dries really pretty quickly. So I would set it aside for about an hour just to make sure. If you're in a hot room or it's hot, the weather's warm, it will probably take less time. Let it dry completely though. And then you're going to just go over it I like to use, so you go over it in one color. I used a lighter green in this example, but just paint it solid. Make sure that you get good coverage. And because you kind of sometimes have to scrub around with the brush to make sure that you're getting in the cracks and crannies, I tend to use a little bit crappier brushes that I don't really care about messing up, just because I don't want to ruin them from scrubbing around. But in this step, it's not really that bad. But so paint it a solid color and try to go a lighter color. So if you're going to use reds or blues or even a brown, you might want to bring the color up with mixing it with a lighter color, or just use a lighter shade.
Mm-hmm.
So and then you're going to let that dry. You're going to let it sit and dry completely. You want it to be 100% dry. And then the fun part, and this is where the magic really happens with this technique, you're going to use, in the example, I used a deeper shade of green. And a lot of times when I'm doing this, I just add some black or some browns or like a real deep sienna, like a burnt sienna or umber, to the color that I'm using, depending on the color it is. So I just make a much darker and more saturated version of the color. So I like to call it the shadow color.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to take a really shitty brush that you can scrub around because you don't want to ruin them. And you're just going to scrub into I would do it section at a time, because you're going to have to wipe it off and you don't want it to dry. So you get a wet paper towel and wring it out so it's just damp. And then you scrub into the texture with this dark color and make sure you get it in every, glop on the paint too. Just get it in every nook and cranny. And then you're going to gently wipe it off. Just dab. Because what you want to do is deposit the darker color in the cracks and crevices that all the wrinkles make.
Oh, very cool. You sort of do it the opposite way of what I was thinking. That's really awesome.
Yeah, and that's actually how I do, the Chicken Whisperer piece that I made for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I did all that.
That's
in that
so
piece.
Cool.
So, and this is how I do a lot of stuff with this one. I like it. And again, it's a really versatile texturing technique because you can have just a few cracks or just a few wrinkles. You can have a lot of wrinkles. You can use, make shapes, like wave shapes, like I was saying before, or I've twisted up tissue paper and made kind of rope and stuff before. It's really, really very versatile, but you'll do that over the whole piece, scrubbing the darker color in and wiping it off with the damp paper towel. And it really depends on how much you want to wipe off. You can leave it really dark with just the tips, just a little highlight, or you can just leave a little bit of darkness to it. So, I mean, you can really make it your own with this method, and then you just let it dry, which at that point, it doesn't take that long to dry at all. And then there you have it.
That's awesome. Do you ever take the heat gun or blow dryer at the gluing process to speed up that process?
Sometimes I do, but generally Mod Podge dries fast enough that while I'm mixing paint, because I mix most of my own paint colors.
Mm-hmm.
So while I'm mixing paints and experimenting and kind of getting stuff set up for the next step, usually if I don't glob on the Mod Podge too heavily, by the time I'm ready for the next step, it's dry anyway. So, because it dries super duper fast. So, and I, like I said, I use this a lot, this technique a lot. So, and you can seal this with a few things afterwards, and it'll kind of add different kinds of texture. Sometimes I seal it with, if I'm doing collage work or adding stuff to it, I'll use gel medium, like just the regular golden gel medium. But even that kind of changes the texture of it, and there are things that, they're just experiment with it. Like, it can be a base for so many different things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It seems it could just be your whole background for any of your canvases.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. I wonder, you said it was the opposite of the way you thought that I did it. How did you think that I did it?
I thought you would have done the colors opposite for some reason.
Huh.
I don't know why.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could though.
Because you're pulling away, so
I think I think the reason that I do, and it just naturally went in this order to me, but I think the reason that I do the lighter color and then the darker color is that it's easier to cover a lighter color with a darker.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? To get good coverage than doing the laying down dark and then doing the light. But I actually have done it in that order too. Some of the things that I do, like when I've done, I went through a phase where I did a lot of like blues and blacks.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I was doing the blues, I wanted to kind of create like a creepy, almost wispy effect. And so I used the lighter blue in the creases. So yeah, you can do it either way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting.
That's fun. I'll have to try that technique.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I love it. And again, like sometimes I even use this technique when I'm working with the sculpting on the canvas with the epoxy resin clay. I do this over the top of it. I use texture to go for the darker. I want a darker tone and I want kind of a broody, deeper, almost, I don't want to say creepy, but my husband did tell me that I was 8 pounds of creepy in a 5-pound bag. That's what he did. Sharon, did you have anything that you wanted to add here before we wrap things up on this Textures to Live By episode that we're doing?
No, I don't think so. I feel like we covered a lot of ground today.
That's good. We did, actually. We covered a lot of ground. Oh, this kind of, I don't know. Once we got talking about our favorite textures, time just kind of flew by. I'll just remind everybody, if you would like to see step-by-step images to go with the little tutorials that we gave you today, you can check that out on our blog, which is 2artsygals.wordpress.com. TWOARTSYGALS. That's always how we're spelled. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode, you can feel free to email us at 2artsygals@gmail.com, or you can contact us and follow us on the Facebooks. We have a page there, which is 2artsygals. So check us out. And again, if you have any show ideas or questions about these episodes or comments, or if you have any cool textures that we didn't cover and you think we should know about, we are always excited to learn about anything new. So please feel free to let us know about that. We'll be excited to hear from you. So awesome episode, Sharon. Thank you so much. You taught me some pretty cool stuff, and I have some new products to buy. So.
Awesome. Me too. You taught me some great stuff too, Katie.
Cool. Well, we will see you all next week. And until then, just have some fun arting time and make some cool stuff. And we'll talk to you then. Bye.
Bye.